This is the second year that we've put on programming associated with the Stanford Women in Data Science Conference, which I think is in its 4th year. So we're excited to bring you two of our wonderful alumni today for a panel on women in machine learning. But first I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Stanford WiDS conference, some of the other programming that we're offering today, and some of the events to expect throughout the week, as this is also the kickoff of Berkeley's inaugural Data and Tech for All week. So there's a lot of exciting things happening around technology and inclusion all around us. So I hope some of you may have had the chance to watch some of the live streaming talks from Stanford, which have been going on this morning, and that you've taken away some new insights from them. And if you didn't know about that, or you haven't had a chance yet, you can watch all those recordings at a later date as well at widsconference.org. So here at Berkeley, we're featuring 4 amazing women in data science from our iSchool, postdoc, alumni, and graduate student communities. And 2 of these women, Michele Kearney and Jen Chen, are with me here right now for our panel on women in machine learning. And I'll introduce them a little bit more in a moment, but I also encourage you to watch our 2 live stream talks this afternoon. So at 3:15, we'll have Dr. Morgan Ames speaking about the myth of the self-taught programmer, which I think will be a really exciting talk. And at 3:45, we'll have Anna Jacobson, one of our current Master of Information and Data Science students, speaking about the building blocks of gender equality, health, education, and employment. And Anna is a winner of Google's Visualize 2030 contest with that project, which was described as feminist data science. So I encourage you to all tune in for those. Those will be live streamed and recorded. And if you haven't signed up to watch them yet, you're here, so you've probably seen our event listing. But if not, just visit our website, ischool.berkeley.edu, and find Women in Data Science under events. So now to our panel. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today with these 2 brilliant and innovative women. So Michele Kearney, who's with us today in the green, she's a MIMS 18 alumna. She currently works as a machine learning specialist and a user experience designer at Amazon, although I really want to emphasize that she's not here speaking on behalf of Amazon today, and is actually speaking on behalf of the many other projects that she's pursued personally in this area, including being the organizer and co-founder of San Francisco's Machine Learning and UX Meetup group. Are you a founder, Michele? Or you are the founder, yes, of this group. Yeah. So you can find them online at mlux.com, mluxsf.com. And she teaches as a lecturer at the Stanford d.school as well. So Michele describes herself as interested in designing and helping others to design systems of machine learning that create lasting value within their human contexts and environments, which I stole from her LinkedIn page. So thank you for joining us today, Michele. And I also want to say that Michele is fighting laryngitis to be with us here. So if her answers are short or if she has to step out for a moment, then please forgive her. And Jen Chen, who is a MIDS 2018 alumna, currently works as a physician data scientist at Curai, which fuses together her medical and technical expertise. Jen is also a pediatric pulmonologist at Miller Children's Hospital Long Beach and an assistant health sciences clinical professor at UC Irvine, both of which she's done for just about 5 years. I think that's right. So she describes herself as interested in leveraging machine learning with medical expertise to improve healthcare efficiency, especially related to reshaping electronic medical records. Thank you so much for being here today, Jen. So just a couple logistics. We're thrilled to have all of you here in the room with us in person. We also have an online audience for our live stream, and this talk will have an afterlife in a recording. So for our asynchronous audience and our streaming audience, although the microphones in this room don't amplify our voices, they do pick up our voices for those recordings. So when we get to the question and answer session, please do wait for those mics to go around so that we can capture all of the voices, as long as you're okay with having your voice captured on the stream. Yes, and then I think those are all of our logistics. So let me get to our wonderful panelists. So I want to just start with what might seem like a really simple question, but I think it's also really revealing. So when I wrote and asked each of you to be on this panel and said, we're going to have a women in machine learning panel, why did you say yes? Why did you accept? Like, what made it seem like it was important to have a panel focused on women in machine learning, and what motivated you to be in this conversation?
So I got really excited because aside from we'll get to the women part, but the fact that I'm talking at a tech conference is very jarring. It's a little surreal. So of course, yes. On top of that though, the fact that it's women's specifically, I think is really important because of what I'm starting to learn, how much gender bias is prevalent in everything that we do doesn't matter what discipline, it doesn't matter what career, and it could be very subtle. And I think the fact that we talk about it, discuss it, share our experiences, kind of learn from it, is a way that we can change things. So.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and for me, just want to double check, is this on?
It's on.
It's
yes.
on? Okay,
yeah.
Cool. So I'm just excited to share my experience. I'm just excited because 10 years ago on this campus, I started in computational neuroscience, and I feel like I had a roundabout way into machine learning and data science. Took a little bit of a detour into UX, and now I get to actually combine the two in a really cool and interesting way. And I want to give a shout out to anyone out there who feels a little bit lost. It's okay. Go find your way. So.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and I think important for the audience to hear. And I'm excited as we move to our questions to hear from experiences of folks in the audience as well, as I think we have an amazing community also attending here. So Jen, you said we'll get to the women part in a moment, which I think is fair, that there's a couple ways, you know, for you that this is a career shift from medicine or taking medicine into data science, as well as you're kind of here as a woman in data science. So I'm wondering for each of you, in what ways has identifying as female intersected with your data science work? You know, do you go through your day, do you think of yourself as a woman in tech? What might that mean to you?
I can start first. I would not be here if it wasn't for programs like Women Who Code and Railsbridge, which encouraged me to branch out from what I was doing before, which is making neural networks in MATLAB, into actually teaching full stack engineering. So programs like that encouraged me to identify as a woman in tech versus I would have just been an academic, I guess, lady scientist. I think those programs are incredibly important and incredibly valuable. For those folks out there who are looking for a community, I would highly recommend checking them out. They're still going strong. And especially they're great about getting marginalized groups, not just women, but especially people of color, coding and able to stay in their homes here in San Francisco. So I think being a woman plays a large part into what I do on the day-to-day because I know that I stand on the shoulders of giants and all these other people who came before me to pave the way. And like, I'm not just representing myself when I go into a room, I'm also representing like, hey, all these other people that I've now worked with and like what type of product would they want and that type of thing, so. And
do you, not to put you on the spot, but do you often feel like you're the only woman in the room in a tech meeting or one of a few, or that there is that pressure to be representative or of people beyond yourself?
Sometimes I think it depends. I will say I do feel very lucky because my team at Amazon is awesome. I'm not here to speak about my time at Amazon, but my manager was actually the keynote of InfoCamp last year, Marissa Gallagher, and she leads this awesome team at Amazon Music, and so she's kind of set the tone for a super inclusive environment, and I really love working there. So.
And what about you, Jen? Is this part of who you are in your mind? You know, you're a woman in tech, or not really? What do you think?
I actually don't think about it. It doesn't really come up until it's so obvious, so I might be just clueless. Yeah. So it's kind of like, well, you know, starting from medical training, way back when I started in medical school, there were a lot more guys and girls. That's just how it was. And you almost accept it as the norm. You don't think about it. You don't go out and be like, oh, you know, why is my class 70% guys? And then you start noticing it as people bring it up, which is why I think it's important to have this kind of forum to kind of recognize that. Now, though, having finished MIDS and then transitioning from a full-time clinician to data science, I'm starting to appreciate that health information part of it. I think we'll touch on it later, but health information, a lot of it is focused on men, research on men, clinical trials on men. Definitely not a blanket statement, but just being cognizant of that, I think, and being able to recognize that in what you do is essential. You know, that's how we bring our voice as women. So no, I don't identify myself as I'm a woman in tech, but definitely in the back of my mind on my work.
Yeah, I think that's valuable too, because it's interesting how these labels and categories of being a woman in tech or a woman in data science, they can be really useful and meaningful, and they can be umbrellas under which programs are developed and initiatives happen and community happens, but then it also might not be how you kind of think about yourself or identify on a daily basis. And I think that's an interesting tension that sort of up and coming data scientists are living with today. Like, do I align myself with these kind of existing movements and groups, or how do they relate to me? me. And I'm interested too that you brought up your medical training, because I was curious, is another really male-dominated field that you've worked in, but it's a really established one as opposed to this rapidly changing environment. So do those feel different in some way, that the gender, are people talking more about gender in data science because it's new, or maybe I'm wrong about that? I don't know.
I think you hit the nail on the head, because I'm pediatrics, right? So peds tends to be mostly women are getting there. It's interesting coming from, so I came from academia, I came from research and then clinician to full-time here. It's very different because, like you said, it's a long-standing tradition. Things can be commented on in medicine that you just kind of smile and nod it off, right? Whereas here, I think there's much more focus on diversity, inclusivity, and it might be, like you said, like where you work. I chose Curai because they deliberately wanted to increase their diversity, and that's something that's brought up almost on a weekly basis, you know, which is why we're almost getting close to that 50% of women that they wanted. But like you look at residency and your training, and yes, they touch on it. Yes, you have that inclusivity, but they don't make it a point, right? And of course, on top of that, being a physician, you go into your patient's room, and I deal with mostly parents. My kids are a little, like my patients are a little younger, so they don't really say anything, but my parents are like, oh, you know, I didn't know nurses came in so often, or you know, there's like very subtle things like that you can't really fault them for it, because that's the way the culture is now. But you can say something, you know, when someone says that, either make a joke of it and make it obvious that, no, I'm your physician, you know, this is where the buck stops, so deal with it in a nicer way. Like, I don't say it that way, but it is a very different environment. And I think this is a more advanced place where I want medicine to eventually go to.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring up too the individual level, where when we might see, frankly, bias from an individual, but without intention behind it, you're not necessarily placing all the weight of that bias continuing to exist on that one person who brought it out, but they're representative of this larger social trend that's only going to change if we intervene with individuals. So it puts you in a tough position, especially as their doctor, right? You might have more pressing things to tell them as well. I had a similar question for you, Michele, about the MLUX group, because you have machine learning, user experience, and my non-scientific impression is that user experience designers are more heavily female than other jobs in tech, which maybe that's an inaccuracy, I don't know. Does it feel like you're bringing together like UX researchers who tend to be more heavily female and machine learning specialists who tend to be more heavily male? Or do you think that's an oversimplification that I have in my mind? Tell me if I'm wrong. Tell us all.
One thing that I really strive to do is create an inclusive environment. And for those of you who have attended the events, like I put up our value statements first and foremost about like, hey, no one here is an expert in both machine learning and UX. This is an emerging field. We're all starting at ground zero, and we are all experts in something else, so we can all learn from each other. And I think that also sets the tone, too, about, like, we will not have any of this, like, oh, I'm more macho than you, or I'm more legit than you, or something. I think UX, to get to your first question, UX may skew a little bit more female, but it is very... Still in Silicon Valley, there's still a lot of tech culture.
That doesn't mean 60%.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. That's something that I have consciously tried to create that space for, and I think it's because I see it, as Jen pointed out, like I see it modeled in the environment that I'm in, and I want to create that space for the communities that I'm involved in. So.
I appreciate that, and I like the reframing to expertise as opposed to chopping people up by fields, because then we can really recognize people as individuals coming in together. So I can see why you're such a great community builder, how it's coming out.
And I can actually talk.
When you can talk. You're doing a lot, even with the voice you have. So, Jen, you also alluded to, bias. You're seeing that you don't think of yourself as a woman in tech until it comes up, and then it feels really obvious. And I wondered if either of you wanted to comment a little more on the machine learning side of this kind of machine learning, women in machine learning panel. We hear a lot in the news about algorithmic bias, at least if your newsfeed's curated the way mine is, working at the iSchool, right? And the ways that bias creeps into systems that people intend to be designing as ethically neutral or believe that they're designing is ethically neutral. So there's a ton of examples of this, and I'm sure the audience could throw some out, but image recognition software, more likely to associate pictures of homemakers with women, of people lifting weights with men, word embeddings trained on news articles, reinforce gender stereotypes, associating receptionists with women, job recruitment software might prioritize resumes from men because historically the company has hired men. And you also said, and this was kind of a throwaway comment, but I think it was really meaningful, Jen, like you can't really blame them because that's the way the culture is. So in all of these cases, algorithms are reinforcing things that have been existing biases in culture. So the algorithm's right in one sense, like that is how it has been, but it's not where we want to go. So I don't know if you have, I don't know, what are thoughts from both of you on that? Like, what are the ways that you see bias coming up in your work or that you want to combat it?
I mean, yeah, I'm so stoked about this question because I know a lot of us in the room really care about algorithmic fairness and anti-bias and all that stuff. I'm also really stoked because if Andrea Gagliano, who is MIM 17, is watching, she's actually coming into our class down at Stanford this week to speak about this. So Andrea, I'm going to talk a little bit about your work. So she works at Getty Images. She's a data scientist, and one of the things that she does is actually be conscious about the biases that exist. So like when you search for doctor, should that just return images of like white old guys in lab coats?
Or Jen Chen. There's our other option.
Right. So I think what she does is very elegant, where she's like aware of these biases and make sure that when she is building out those models and everything too, how do you prepare for those edge cases? And it's way easier to try to do it in advance than it is to try to fix all of the holes like whack-a-mole. So I would encourage all of us to like just think about some of those edge cases. Like we're all talking about it. There's ways around this. I'm sure you can learn too from the data science courses like stratified sampling or like simulating some data of underrepresented populations and stuff like that too. But we know that it's out there, so it's up to us to try to incorporate that into our models before we build them.
Mm-hmm. I kind of feel, I was just talking about this before, but I kind of feel like an imposter being here just because I started machine learning, you know, not too long ago, so just have that as context.
Society only started it, you know.
Yeah, sorry.
Not that long ago either. So.
The exposure is very new to me. But you know, the only thing I know is really health data, and so I'm going to keep going back to that as an example. For example, what we want to design is something that can generalize to all sorts of different populations. Our platform that we're building, and one significant chunk is women. And so when you see the data being geared towards, you know, the certain areas that are more prone for men to talk about and leaving out things like OB-GYN, women's issues, periods, for God's sakes, like the basic stuff, that's my kind of way of speaking up and say, hey, we might want this represented in the data, or we might want to check. And so I have benchmarks that I kind of go through and make sure things are well represented. You know, how many topics reflect women's health, how many topics reflect maybe questions on sex ed. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like my way of bringing it some kind of inclusion into the data. Not that I can make it up, but saying or asking for maybe we need new sources of data that reflect this whole population that's being ignored. That's the way I've been thinking about it. So.
And do you get pushback from that when you suggest asking more questions or different questions? Are people just like, oh, great, thank you, I'm glad you were here, which would happen in a wonderful workplace, I think, but, or do you sometimes get, you know, oh, well, you know, that's not everyone, or I don't know.
Well, I don't think it's so much pushback as to, hey, we don't want to talk about women's issues. It's definitely here, working at Curai, if anything, it's the opposite, whereas like that's a really good point, let's move on that. Let's not just sit on it, let's actually actively look for something. Whereas in academia, it's kind of limited because, especially clinical trials, patients, there's only so many patients, mm-hmm. and you work with what you have. Like when you've done research, you can't really go out and convince or bribe people to join clinical studies, and oftentimes men can join them. Again, blanket statement, I'm sorry. Men can join because they do have more time, whereas women, they have a lot of other issues on their plate, so you don't see as much of a representation. So that kind of, it's a different kind of limit between the two. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And then you end up, because of who can join the trial, who can be in the experiment, is itself limited. So it's not necessarily reflecting minority populations, Black, Native, trans, Latinx, right? Yeah, that's it. So to take the question out more broadly, if both of you could dream, if you could throw out an idea and the machine learning experts of tomorrow and today would operate on it, what's the big problem that you think we should be tackling with machine learning the next 5 years, 10 years, maybe within health or within MLUX, you know, the domains you're familiar with? Like, what's your dream use of this technology?
Well, one thing that I want to acknowledge is that machine learning in the last like 10 years has come like leaps and bounds to being accessible, like with the invention of like Jupyter notebooks and shared clusters, and like now we can have collaboratory notebooks. Like, what? As someone who used to spin up their own clusters, I'm like, this is amazing. It's like Google Docs, but for Python. So I think that we're going to see a huge trend towards more declarative machine learning experiences where you don't necessarily need a machine learning expertise, but similar to like how we use scikit-learn packages and everything too, it's very easy to just take models out of the box and just start using them. But I think a huge danger in that is if you don't have the background and understanding of what data science is, and you don't understand like where our own biases might you might have a sparsely encoded data set and just drop the null values. Oh no, you just excluded an entire population of people, right? But that's like training that you get with on the job, doing a bunch of models, all this stuff too. So while it's very exciting that I think like there's so much data science to be done out there, not enough data scientists, so they're building out these tools. I think it's important for us, like as the people making these tools and shaping these tools, to make sure that we make it very transparent to our users, like what are some of the pitfalls that they could fall into. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Would you add to that, Jen, or what do you think?
I would. First off, I don't understand half the things you said, but it sounded like I would get on that. But in terms of my focus, it's I want more people to have access to healthcare, like the end. And so I really think that the future of ML in healthcare, if you look at what's going on right now, it's very narrow, or it's focused on predictive outcomes of specific patients, like septic patients. Why does this patient do better? Why does this patient do worse? Or clinical trials on drug tests, or therapeutics is a big one. I would love in 10 years, hopefully earlier, to see more of interest in something called social determinants of health, which are the things outside of the factors that you measure in the clinic, office, or the hospital, things that really impact your access or your ability to improve your health. Anything from like transportation is one thing, having kids, not having enough money for like a smartphone, or just things that we take for granted a lot, to build that somehow into the algorithm and recognize that maybe this patient would have been doing well, has poorly controlled diabetes, but would be great if he or she lived by a bus stop that goes to the clinic for better follow-up, or forget that, just do it through the phone or through a laptop or something like that. So that's what I'm hoping for, to kind of add more features and recognize that there are definitely like 90% of what determines your health is something that we can't handle as doctors.
Yeah, I love what you said, because a lot of times people talk about expanding access to healthcare, but they might not think about what access to healthcare means, right? Does that mean showing up at your doctor's office, or does that mean your phone interacts with you differently, or that someone has helped restructure your time or made things available at other times, or is using machine learning to trace back the connections between the different parts of your day to understand, why did you end up eating fast food? Because you waited for the bus for 90 minutes, right? So what actually happened? So I love that. That's awesome. What do you think the audience needs to know, or maybe many of them already know, and you'd like them to think about more about the limitations of machine learning? And we've touched a little bit on sampling and sort of bias toward the majority that might end up in your experiment, but are there other things people should know? That I've used a little of the language I hear in culture that, what problem will we solve with technology tomorrow? Everyone download this app, poverty is gone, right? And there's something we really need to put the brakes on that, I think. So what would you say people need to know about the limitations of this field?
Gosh. So my one thing that I hear a lot, especially when I go back to the hospital, I get dinged because they're like, you're helping the wrong side build a doctor and we're all going to be out of jobs and it'll be your fault. And I'm like, I don't think you really understand, because there's a lot of headlines now about it and about doctors being replaced. And I don't think that is or should be a huge worry right now. It's a long ways off if it even ever happens. And right now, I think that's a limit, because if you read these articles that are kind of hyping it up, they say things like, well, like there's a big radiology study that they took a bunch of images and they said it performs better than your human radiologist, right? But if you look at the study, it's like they're measuring on parameters that your human radiologists won't even bother with. They don't even deal with, because their knowledge is so far beyond it. And they also communicate with the patient. They also restrict. There's a lot of things that machine learning / AI / whatever you want to call it doesn't do that a doctor does. And so the idea that we shouldn't be working on this because we're going to lose our job someday is, I think, far-fetched, to put a nice term for it. What's more interesting is that we could do our jobs better because of machine learning. Right? But not so much that's a threat, but it's an enhancement of what we can do. And so that's how I try to reassure my colleagues. And I would say half of them are super excited, and the other half are still typing with the 2 index fingers and won't listen to me. But I'll keep trying on that one.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what I see is a ton of designers think the same thing. And just like Jen said, machine learning can only be a tool and an asset to you, and it helps you then not have to deal with the boring stuff, because it's finding those patterns for you. And as a doctor, I'm sure you could focus on the more interesting things, why you actually became a doctor, like in dealing with patients and all that stuff too. Same with design. A lot of designers are very concerned about oh, machine learning is going to take our job and whatever, but machine learning is just a tool to help you explore a bunch of different ways of presenting things or things like that. We still need the design side to help actually choose which one to go through. But the other thing that I would say that people need to be thinking about is machine learning can't happen without data. So I know we all kind of probably know this too, but just for all of you out there, there's a lot of misconceptions about AI taking over and all this stuff, but without the data, we can't actually do that. Not that we want that to happen, but I would want us to start thinking about more ways to design ways that users can interact with these models and stuff too, not only to give feedback to these models, as in more data points in order to enhance it, but just so that way they understand what the model is actually doing and make that experience more transparent to them. I think we're moving in that direction, and I think there's a huge push for algorithmic transparency, but yeah, it's not something that we currently think about in terms of designing these machine learning models. It's very much a one-off. So I would encourage all of us to start thinking in terms of what is the lifespan of this model? How do we actually have ways that users can engage with it? What would that actually look like?
Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing from both of you that these people who are telling me that we should get rich now because in 5 years AI will do all our jobs are actually not right, which is a relief to everyone, especially those of us without your specialized expertise. I want to save time for audience questions because we have such a rich, wonderful audience, and I don't know all of you, but I know many of you, and so I know that there's a lot of expertise in the room. So I could ask Michele and Jen questions pretty much all day, but are there burning questions that you have right now that folks have in the audience? Yeah, and Caitlin, thank you for spontaneously running our mic. I didn't tell them I was going to suddenly go to questions. Thank you.
Thanks, ladies, for the panel. So I have a question about algorithm transparency that Michele's been talking about, or I guess it's a question for everyone. And then would you say that education, education of machine learning, just having people to understand more of the backends, how statistics and computer science integrated themselves into the models, as you mentioned, will help people. What will help kind of promote transparency, or what are some of the solutions that you're thinking about?
Yeah, that's definitely something that I care a lot about. That's actually what the class that I'm teaching down at Stanford is on. It's on designing machine learning. It's a non-technical course for everybody. We have people from design, law, we have people who've done computer vision, but it's exactly that point about like, hey, how do we get everybody in the room to understand what the touch points of a data science pipeline are, and like what are design decisions that could be made, so that way it's not this black box of like, oh, well, this is what the model said, and like, that's the output, but oh, it could have gotten this result because the data that I fed it was different. Or when I was feature engineering, like I decided to combine these two values and that was the wrong take. Or even just how I'm evaluating the model. Like maybe I shouldn't be using precision and recall. Maybe I should be using something else to designing the output of the model. I think that's a huge first step, is like breaking it down into ways that people can have the shared vocabulary to understand it. That's just my take, and that's also what I promote at the Meetup too, but it seems to be working really well. And I think that helps just generally people have an understanding and like that transparency element into like what is machine learning, and like not just think that it's some black box that can't be changed.
I'm remembering a MIMS, I think a MIMS final project from a couple, maybe last year, your class called Explainable Machine Learning. Did you work on that, Michelle? No, I don't think so. But yes, but I think this has been an iSchool concern of like making sure people understand what they're using and why, what they might use instead, as opposed to just sort of slapping, you know, that's the old adage about when you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So. Well, and Deidre and Jenna's AFOG, Output with Fairness and Opacity Working Group. Important shout out. We may have also sponsored by Meetup, so thank you, AFOG. Yes. Important shout out. And I think there's an AFOG event coming up later this week. I'm looking at Caitlin, who tends to know about events. We don't know offhand. Okay, but follow them on our website in the events section for upcoming Algorithmic Fairness and Opacity Working Group events. Are there other audience questions right now are burning for people? Yes, there are.
So can you talk about what you think the most impactful project or initiative that you've ever worked on?
Yeah, great question.
Like machine learning related?
If that's what you can talk about, but if not, then
can you start?
We're open to hearing other things.
Yeah. Okay, because
I know the first ones that I think of is like, I used to be a disaster responder, and that was really cool.
Nothing. Counselor.
Yeah. But I think machine learning related would definitely be the Meetup, just because I think it's been such a rewarding experience to be able to connect those two fields that people might think is disparate, like that they don't go together. So many times before I had this Meetup, people were like, data science, UX, those are two separate job categories. They don't go together. But by hosting these events, just with people who I knew working on really cool things, I was like, you're going to be talking to me about this. Why don't you just talk to a couple, what I thought was going to be like 30 people as a pizza party is now turned into 100 people every month. And we have over...
You're going to say it, how many on the mailing list?
I think over 1,400. Yeah, it's like grown a lot. It's only been like a little over a year. But I think I feel like that's a vanity metric. The cool thing about it is we are talking to people who are working on this emerging technology and actually sharing out their best practices. And like that's been really cool because I've actually seen new jobs pop up because of it. So like there's a UX data science team now over at Stitch Fix. There's some roles are now being called decision scientists, which are not just relying only on the data, but thinking about the human side too, so bringing qualitative research. There's jobs that are HIG guidelines, like UX designers making overall guidelines for machine learning systems and like how to make machine learning designs. So like that to me is really inspiring because these people reach out, they're like, hey, look, we have this stuff, whatever. So yeah, and if you guys are interested, I guess I'll just plug it now. The next meetup is the 28th of March at Salesforce. It's on data-driven personas, so it's using unsupervised learning methods in order to drive quant UX.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Jen?
I would say right now I'm really enjoying, I'm working on a pediatrics engine for my current position, but that's not exactly finished yet, so I don't know what the impact is going to be. But I would have to say that our capstone project at MIDS was #1, like the most rewarding project in the 2 years that I've learned machine learning. And I also say that with a shout out to my MIDS project team member, Erica Lawrence back there. So our project was to take clinical conversations and be able to write out the framework of an EHR note. And that might sound like, kind of a mundane task, but while I was working on that project, I would go back to the hospital and see, 30 patients and just want to cry because I would be spending 8 hours on charting and writing notes and then like 3 hours on my patients, and the ratio is completely flip-flop. And coming back to MIDS, coming back to our group and working on that really gave me hope, kind of made it easier to be in the slog. And on top of that, also, so that was one part. And then as a woman, I feel like we tend to self-doubt a lot, right? Like question ourselves, maybe not be as confident as our male counterparts in the same position. And so I was experiencing a lot of that at the end of the program, like where am I going to go? Am I doing the right thing? And my husband was saying, oh, you're gonna be fine. You just go out there and interview, they'll love, it's just like, how do you know, and then, don't get me on the negotiating part, I'm like, I don't wanna negotiate, I don't wanna do anything, I just want the job. And he's like, don't say that, you gotta go in. And I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, he has a completely different perspective. And then so this project also kind of reinforced, yes, what you're doing is the right thing, or if it's not exactly fitting now, it's needed at some point. So that validation really helped too.
And if what Jen Chen is saying is resonating with any of you experiencing the confidence gap, I encourage you to Google the confidence gap and learn that you are not alone, and read more of the research about that there really are these gendered trends. Actually, in salary negotiation, there's some academic debate about whether men actually effectively negotiate for better salaries. And there's some interesting work coming out of Haas about that right now with, I'm going to forget the faculty member's name, but you can Google that too. But these are real social trends, right? And then when we experience them personally, it's very visceral. It feels visceral. So exciting. It's also funny to ask, I think, two folks who've worked in medical and sort of emergency response fields, their most impactful project, because you're like, it was that person that I healed, So that's, machine learning important too, right? Did I see one more hand in the audience before we go back to my...
I had a question about transitioning to data science from a different field, and particularly doing that as a woman. If your background is in data science and you're maybe competing against people who majored in computer science, how to, I think particularly coming into that as a woman, how to convey that you are competent, that you are capable, and get someone to kind of give you the benefit of the doubt in that situation.
Like I mentioned before, you are an expert in something. Don't doubt yourself in that. I think that data science seems like very far off and like, oh, it's only people who do machine learning or something. But actually, a lot of us do data science on our day-to-day, just in the act of like our typical analysis. It's just a matter of formalizing those skills. And there's a ton of resources here too. I used to teach at the D Lab over here. They have free courses for graduate students. Totally recommend that. And I would also recommend checking out other meetup groups like Pythonistas and stuff, like welcoming environments, which will hold you accountable to getting those skills that you already have, like because you have this other expertise in something else. When you talk about transitioning to data science, something that's really strong for me is seeing where that person's passion is. And so if you're coming from like medicine and you're like, I'm passionate about bringing data science to medicine or data science to design or something like that, I think that makes you an even stronger candidate because you have that background expertise and that subject matter expertise. But it's just think about it as like learning the other skills that just check the box on the resume. And there's a bunch of free resources here on campus and around too. Feel free to tweet at me if you have questions about that. I'm happy to point you in the right direction.
I love that you're kind of alluding to the career advice of telling your story, right? That you sort of have your narrative that you convey to people about how you got where you are and where you're going next. And that's what gives them that, that confidence that you're moving forward. And I wonder if you have a similar transition story too. I mean, I gave little bios of each of you, but I didn't let you tell your own story. So Michele, how do you each tell your own story? What's your elevator pitch of sort of how you got where you are when you're doing this?
Yeah, I leave out the entire emergency disaster response stuff. I'm just like, whatever, that doesn't matter. So yeah, I studied computational neuroscience here on this campus with the Helen Wills Neuroscience Institute, Frederick Tunison over on the other side of campus. So for 5 years, I was a computational neuroscience researcher. Realized that I really love designing experiments and love working with people more than I liked writing models of neural networks. So went into UX research and did some full stack engineering UI design as well. Realized that I really miss the quantitative side. So came back to the iSchool to kind of marry the data science and UX experience. But I have a myriad of other expertise, including volunteering for the American Red Cross for the last 9 years as a national disaster responder, going to like Hurricane Sandy and Texas floods and stuff, because I like people.
Going to your question, I was scared out of my mind. Like the context was, I was done with training. I was about 4 years after training finished, being an attending, and I would have maybe like 3/4 of the time doing tele-exercise research and then 1/4 of the time doing clinical work. And my grant was up in a year and a half. And in academia, when your grant is up, that like the pressure is, I see Alex like, the pressure is on, right? So if you don't have funding, you're out. If you don't schmooze and find some way and find some role, you're out. And as a junior level faculty, the pressure is intense. And so I knew academia wasn't exactly right for me. And I knew full-time clinical wasn't exactly right for me, but I didn't know what to do. I say this a lot, but I Googled what data science was. That's how I started. Like, I was like, this sounds cool. And I think Harvard Business Review said it was the sexiest job of the 21st century. I'm like, I've never been sexy before. I want to be sexy. Let's see how it goes, right? So that's honestly, I remember doing that and telling my husband, I'm like, I think I'm gonna, check this data science stuff out. I've never taken a coding class. I've never taken computers. I was so scared. So I talked to a lot of staff here. I just talked to a lot of people. And what I started to do, because there wasn't any physicians that I knew that had the same interest, right? So in whatever field you have, even if there's no one sharing your interest, you can totally just go and I tweeted at people, I LinkedIn people, and most of the times, I would do this maybe 10 messages a week, and I would get nothing back, right? Like, it would be crickets. But then once in a while, like I remember there was a data scientist I wrote for Wired magazine, I forgot her name, but she wrote me back and said, yeah, let's set up a phone call. I was like, great. So over time, that's what I kept doing. And it requires a lot of maintenance, but you start feeling like you have a role. And whatever background you have, the fact that maybe you don't know machine learning as well, but you do have your domain expertise, I think is huge. I think it's a hugely valuable role that's really underappreciated. And even for us as women to have that self-doubt on top of that, recognizing that shouldn't be on your stress list, right? Just go for it, and then everything kind of works out, meaning if you try to reach out to different people, hear their experiences, network through the same ways, it does reach a very satisfying conclusion, right? So this is like a confession moment. I was 100% 1 year into MIDS, depths of despair, like, what am I doing? Like bawling, and like, it might have been, I was sleep deprived, but whatever. I was really questioning what I was doing. And so instead, and I remember, actually, I think it was in Alex's class, and I went to the office hours, and I was like, I don't understand this. I don't get it. Everyone feels like they're so far ahead of me. And then he explained it, and things just clicked. And then so that happened in every semester with every teacher. And once I kind of got over that, that was just in my head, right? And I started to hear back from more people and say, oh, you are really appreciated. We need people like you because of your domain expertise. I'm like, oh, okay. I feel more comfortable. I feel more validated. I'm just going to keep moving. So I'm hoping that anyone who listens to it can skip that step of that self-doubt, that like thing in your mind that says you can't do it or you shouldn't do it, and just go for it, if anything, just to see what happens.
And I would do a big +1 for just putting yourself out there and keep doing it. I think that's why I really liked Women Who Code, Railsbridge. Those are more like software developer type things, but there is Pythonisa or PyLadies. Those are great. I think they even have one here in Berkeley. Just great communities just to hold yourself accountable, and like there's a bunch of people going through the same thing that you are, of just like, this is really scary. I just emailed like 100 people and like 4 replied. So.
And I know we're kind of starting to wrap up, so I think I also want people to feel inspired to learn more, and we're kind of trending toward, resources each of you were talking about. So, what would you recommend as people walk away today from this? What should they be reading or watching or, doing, following, seeking out besides your Twitter feed and the MLux group, which we know are on the list, right? But, what if they want to know more about machine learning, women in data science, other related topics? What do you guys recommend? What's on your list? Or what do you read?
Yeah, I am really big into AI ethics right now. So Kathy Baxter is publishing a lot of stuff. Yeah, my Twitter has a bunch of stuff of like, here, this is really cool, retweet. There was just a New York Times article about it too. I think it's really pressing right now, and I think it's up to all of us who are, all of us, no matter if we're data scientists in the room or not, we're all developing systems that people are using, and it's really important to consider the ethical implications. So yeah, working on that. There's the San Francisco AI Meetup, and there's an East Bay AI Meetup, which is with Curai, which is the Chai's computer human, I forget what it is, but it's a research group here on campus that's like, what will the future be with robots? And yeah, the groups that I talked about too, Women Who Code, PyLadies, Pythonistas, and yeah, keeping an eye out for inclusive spaces, like Lydia's at UX, at Mel UX, that kind of thing too. When you find a community, that's a great opportunity to expand professionally. So keep on going back, keep on developing those relationships, and that's kind of like how you then grow professionally too, because you get to meet other people and get to learn about them, and it's awesome. So
I don't have any specific resources. The only advice I would give is pretty much rehashing what I just said, so it's kind of boring. So let me see if I can expand it. So Twitter was something I had no idea how to use, and MIDS was when I started using it. And it's kind of nuts because you can have access to anyone, and you make your story impactful enough, they will answer back. Not to say if they don't answer back, that doesn't mean your story's not impactful, but
yeah, if you tweet at me, I will definitely read it.
Yeah, so. and it's kind of nice because you follow people that you're interested in or have the same interests, and then your feed is going to be things that you want to read on. So it also depends on you and networking. Like, I am a people person. I like to network, so I have no problem, going up to Joe Schmo or Jane Schmo in a conference and saying, hey, this is my background. Talk to me, tell me what I need to know, that kind of thing. If that's not your cup of tea, then doing this more passive, like Twitter or signing up for blogs is what I ended up doing. I would just read and sit and read, and that's what I've recommended to my medical students who are also interested in the area but don't like really schmoozing all that much. Because it is kind of daunting to go out and talk to people and then just be rebuffed 9 times out of 10, right? You just gotta have to have thick skin. So I would cater to your interests, and like these meetup groups, I didn't know they would exist. I'm definitely going to one, but yeah. So having that inclusive space that she was talking about it would be great.
Oh, and I do want to plug too one more time the D Lab. Does anybody here teach or work at the D Lab? No. You guys should all go to the D Lab. The D Lab's great.
And the D Lab has an event this week. I'm not going to remember exactly what it is, but on our Data and Tech for All webpage for the events of the week, you can read about the workshop the D Lab is offering this week and some of their other offerings.
Yeah, so I used to teach at the D Lab. I taught their R for data science class. They have R, they have Python, they have all of the special toolkits of R and Python too, geolocation stuff, and it's all for free to UC Berkeley students, so you should totally go check it out. Yeah. Okay.
Cool. And I hear the bell, so I want to thank you both for an informative and inspirational panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.